Coming up on Network Africa. Rescue efforts continue after southern Ethiopia's deadly mudslide, which claimed 229 lives. Ugandan security forces arrest and detain scores of demonstrators in anti-corruption protests. Plus, family of arrested Portuguese-Belgian aid worker calls for his immediate release from military detention in Central African Republic. Hello and welcome to the program today. I'm Layo Olarinde. The search for survivors of a mudslide that claimed the lives of at least 229 people in southern Ethiopia continues. The death toll, which increased significantly from the initial count of 55, included many individuals who attempted to rescue survivors. 5 people have been rescued from the disaster, which was triggered by heavy rains. But the exact number of people still missing is not yet known. The Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, has shared his heartfelt condolences for the devastating loss on Facebook and declared the activation of the Federal Disaster Prevention Task Force to be able to assist in the search and rescue efforts. Well, dozens of demonstrators have been arrested in Kampala, the Ugandan capital, after anti-corruption protests in defiance of an official ban. Approximately 60 people, including a prominent TV presenter and 3 young protest leaders, were hurriedly brought before courts and remanded in custody following a march on the country's parliament on Tuesday. Now, the protests, partly inspired by ongoing Kenya protests, was organized on social media amid anger over long-standing allegations of corruption against many highly placed public officials. President Yoweri Museveni, who has ruled the country for almost 40 years, had warned the protesters before the event that they were playing with fire.
This protest today was organized to address the issue of corruption that is rampant in this government today. So that's why the youth were mobilized to march to Parliament and show our dissatisfaction with the corruption.
We are one East Africa. Their blood is our blood. Their protests have given us the courage to come out and stand for our rights as well.
Let's get more on this now. Joining us to talk more about this is freelance journalist Halima Atumani. Halima is virtually speaking to us from Kampala, the Ugandan capital. Hello, Halima. Thank you so much for your time.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for having me.
Well, can you describe to us, what the protests were like on Tuesday?
Well, yesterday we went out in the morning fast. We thought maybe they were not going to show up because many of us were out in the field by 7:30, going to 8 and nothing. And before we know it, you would just hear, there's been a few people arrested here, a few people arrested downtown, a few people arrested in malls. We even had a moment where we had to walk with the police through one of the big malls called Garden City because they went in literally trying to fish out every protester wherever they were, because in the adjacent mall they had actually arrested a few people. I think there were about 4 of them. And so eventually, after the police was able to calm the city, and remember yesterday, there was literally a heavy presence of military, of police, of intelligence. It was very interesting that, we found ourselves standing next to them. At a certain point, I was actually standing and typing on my phone, sending a tweet, and then a fairly elderly intelligence gentleman just came and started looking at what I was texting, and I just turned. I was like, "Hey, officer, do you want to see what I'm writing? Do you want me to share with you?" But then eventually, at that point, I think all of us as journalists, after all the arrests that had been done on the outskirts of the city, we went and positioned ourselves right a few meters from the parliament entrance. And that's when these young people just kept coming, in batches of 9, in batches of 8, even 1. Those who were brave enough to just come and walk, because at the end of the day, they knew they were going to be arrested. So it was quite hectic. But one thing that stood out in your in the news when you're reading, you did mention that the president had warned and said protesters. Yes, this was the group that came right next to Parliament. In your group, in your statement earlier, you did say that the president warned protesters that they would be playing with fire. It was, however, very interesting to note that yesterday was the first time ever since I started covering protests in almost 1.5 decades that I have never seen a single shot of tear gas fired, which was very impressive.
All right then. And what is the protocol, for having a protest, a demonstration in the country? And I'm asking this because we've seen scores of people arrested. Were these protesters in violation of the laws?
Not at all, interestingly. So Article 29 of Uganda's constitution clearly gives every person the freedoms of speech and expression, as well as the freedom to publicly assemble and demonstrate in a peaceful manner. However, I think around 2014, there was a time when the government came up with a public order management bill, even though there was a section that was annulled. And this eventually was supposed to give the police powers, powers to decide who does. But even now, for the sections that were left, according to the Public Order Management Act that we do have, a protester or anyone who seeks to try and get out and protest, they are supposed to just inform the police that, this is my intention. I want to go out and demonstrate. As long as you're going to do it peacefully, you do not have to seek permission from the police. The only thing that police has to do is come and ensure that your procession or your demonstration or your protest goes on peacefully without any interruption. Unfortunately, that is not always what we see in our streets. When people come out and say we are going to protest, and I think the police also, in a way, should have learned a couple of lessons that during previous protests, every time they let, whether it was the opposition, whether it was just a group of young people or civil society activists trying to demonstrate their dissatisfaction or their disagreement with the government, every time they did that peacefully, it went on peacefully without any interruptions. But every time there was involvement with police, then all of a sudden everything turns chaotic. And of course, that is the reason that the police gives and says we always get out, because in a way the law also allows the police, to ensure that no property is destroyed. You do not infringe on other people's rights. Okay, the public especially, when you're out there protesting. However, if someone comes and says, we just want to go and protest peacefully, then they have the right as per the Constitution. But obviously, these kids have now been charged before court, and we wait to see what happens.
All right, then. Well, now they've been arrested. Lawyers talking about what should be done or, what will be done to secure their freedom.
Well, I think this was one of the fastest court appearances. It's as soon as a protester was arrested yesterday, immediately they were taken to court, immediately taken to prisons. Like, there was no delay. So right now, by evening time, we're basically discussing bail. And that's what most of the lawyers were doing, and until today. But for the courts that sat, bail has been set for between, I think, 30th of this month. Others have their bail hearing set for the 5th to the 6th. Others have probably just have presented before court today, so we don't know if those will probably spend another 2 or 3 weeks in court. So for now, I think the most that lawyers can do is try and apply for bail, but they will also have to wait until the remand period ends. By yesterday evening, I saw a couple of people and activists who were calling on other Ugandans to prepare their documents so that they can stand surety for some of these arrested young people. Unfortunately, I think that was not the case, because we did not hear out of over 50 that were produced before court, no one was released on bail.
All right, just before I let you go, Halima, the reason why Ugandans are protesting, we understand, is because of the Parliament Speaker, Anita Among, who they've been calling for her resignation, by the way. She's been sanctioned by the US and the UK. Have we heard any comments from her or perhaps from the government?
Not at all. Yesterday, when I was speaking to the Parliament publicist, he made it very clear and told me, Halima, one, the protesters never brought us a petition or told us about their planned protests. But also, on the other hand, he said Anita Among is not voted for by Ugandans. Okay, he's in his words, only Anita Mong's constituents and they include the legislators. Remember, we have this bloated parliament. So the legislators who voted Anita Mong, according to Chris Obore, who is the published for Parliament, he said they are the only ones who have the right to call her, to petition and say, let Anita Mong resign. So no matter how much noise Ugandans make, I guess we'll be hitting the wall.
All right, then. We'll see how matters pan out in the coming days. But thank you so much, Halima Adjumani.
But also maybe just to add a little bit, because of everything that happened yesterday, there was quite a heated debate in Parliament where, legislators kept saying, we need to discuss this issue of corruption. When we get out there, they are calling us honorable, but in reality, they are calling us thieves. We need to discuss this. But today we woke up to another statement from Parliament saying the Parliament has been sent on recess until the 30th of July, which is next week, Tuesday.
All right, then. Thank you so much, freelance journalist Halima Adjumani. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
The relatives of a Portuguese-Belgian aid worker who was arrested in the Central African Republic are asking for his immediate release. Joseph Figueira was arrested on suspicion of collaborating with armed groups to plan a coup. His family members continue to assert his innocence in spite of the government's insistence that it has evidence to back up its allegations. Joseph Figueira's Martin's brother previously informed the Associated Press that the aid worker had solely communicated with the rebels in order to ensure his own safety and survival while carrying out his work in dangerous regions of the CAR. On the other hand, reports from authorities in the country suggest that he was involved in financing and coordinating armed groups, supported by evidence such as money transfers and audio recordings. Last week, he initiated a hunger strike to protest the circumstances of his imprisonment. Sub-Saharan Africa is home to many of the world's longest ruling heads of state. Pro-democracy democracy advocates have at times successfully stopped presidents from extending their mandates, but the authoritarian trend could be accelerated. In 2023, 5 sitting African heads of state had been in power for more than 3 decades each. Teodoro Nguema Mbasogo in Equatorial Guinea, Paul Biya in Cameroon, Denis Sassou Nguesso in the Republic of Congo, and Yoweri Museveni in Uganda, and also Isaias Afwerki in Eritrea. Over in the West, the 2 presidential contenders in the U.S. election had been 78-year-old Republican contender Donald Trump and, until a few days ago, 81-year-old Democratic President Joe Biden. Meanwhile, Kenya's President William Ruto has nominated 4 members of the main opposition party to a new cabinet that he promised in response to nationwide protests. The opposition members, including the pick to lead the finance ministry, John Mbadi Ngongo, are allies of opposition leader Raila Odinga, who President Ruto defeated in the 2022 election. Besides the 4 opposition members, President Ruto also named 5 members of the cabinet whom he had dismissed earlier this month in response to protesters' demands.
The government of Kenya will provide necessary support to all families and citizens who lost their loved ones. Unfortunately, there has been many instances of excessive, unlawful, dangerous, and harmful conduct during the demonstrations and engagements, as a consequence of which many persons have been arrested and charged in courts with various offenses. I urge the criminal justice agencies to take effective measures and ensure that people who may have been innocently caught up on the wrong side of things and those not implicated in crimes be released and charges against them withdrawn. Over the last 1 month, the livelihoods and property of many innocent people have also been destroyed, plunging them into destitution and jeopardizing the welfare of their dependents. The government of Kenya will equally take measures to support these Kenyans on the path to recovery of their businesses. I direct the relevant ministries to obtain, verify, and provide accurate data to facilitate appropriate government action within the next 30 days.
Let's take a break now on the program. Still ahead. Kenyan farmers turn to sustainable methods to combat soil acidity. Please join us again. Welcome back to the program. Kenyan farmers who have been suffering declining yields are now turning away from industrial methods of farming to combat increasingly acidic soil. Planting vegetables, Benson Wanjala and his wife are working to cultivate their 2-acre plot of land on the outskirts of Nairobi. This is a significant change to his farming activities 2.5 decades ago when he farmed a 10-acre plot in his native Western Kenya village. Wanjala used to get 200 bags of maize each season, but that has come down to a paltry 30 bags. Greenpeace Africa collaborates with small-scale farmers to raise awareness about transitioning from industrial to sustainable farming methods. They're urging governments to enact laws supportive of sustainable agricultural practices and to provide officers to assist in the transition.
The farmers that are using chemical fertilizers now are maybe 2 generations into using chemical fertilizers, and before they weren't using it. So they don't have the data that would then inform them on how to use them. And who brings the chemical fertilizers? It's the companies that sell them. So their agenda is to push as much chemical fertilizers for sale.
These microorganisms are killed, then clearly it's like saying that a human being without an immune system, you cannot be able, it's like a lifeless body. So like that's what our soils are right now. They don't have structure. They don't have enough microorganisms in the soil to help in nutrient cycling. So we have soils, but our production continues to go down.
Well, let's go back to one of the stories we brought to you earlier. Sub-Saharan Africa being home to many of the world's longest ruling heads of state, and the authoritarian trend, the fears that this could be accelerating. We have African Affairs analyst Okwe Okpala speaking to us now on the subject. Hello, sir. Thank you so much for your time on the program.
It's always my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Let's begin with your thoughts about the tendency of African leaders seeming to hang on to power on the continent.
It's very concerning and has been one of the reasons why Africa is backward in most indices of development. Most African leaders, even those who started well as nationalists, as patriots, as freedom fighters, eventually fall into that trap of trying to stay longer in power than necessary, longer than they can add value, and longer than even when the people want them. And most of the time, this breeds even discontent, and then people begin to fight them, and then can also be responsible for conflicts in Africa. So it's unfortunate, and I wish that our leaders in Africa will be a lot more selfless, that will be a lot more patriotic, and know when the game is up. So that either due to when their tenure is over, or when they stop adding value, because after all, power is not sought for power's sake. It is the power, you are empowered to better the lot of your people. And as long as you are no longer in position to do that, or as long as the Constitution no longer allow you to be in that position, then you can give way for the other people to continue the nation building and the national development.
Well, just recently, we've seen the U.S. President Joe Biden, coming up as the Democratic nominee before bowing to pressure and withdrawing from the 2024 race. And, this has brought up more discussions on geriatric politicians. Is there a lesson here would you say, for African leaders and indeed leaders around the world?
Of course, there is a lot. Because, Joe Biden thought he had been there for 50 years, he served as in the Senate, he served as vice president, and now he's serving as president. And the zeal to serve is still there. And he felt he can add value. But then he recognized that he will not serve the interest of his country, nor interest of his party by continuing to be a candidate. And, he was able to do it because now there are some people around him who told him the truth, within the party who told him the truth. Why it's difficult to why it may not happen in Nigeria or in Africa is that most African leaders, when they get to power, they surround themselves with lackeys, with praise singers, with sycophants who give them steady flow of praises and adoration, so that they don't even understand the real impact of their governance and the real feeling of the people. So the tragedy of Africa is that most African leaders don't even have people who can tell them the truth, who can tell them, look, oh, no, you are no longer adding value, no matter how nicely it is said. But Joe Biden was able to do it because some senators, some leaders within the Democratic Party were able to persuade him that is, and then he himself is patriotic enough to accept that, look, let me do this for my party, let me do this for my country. It is not in interest. I mean, the Democratic Party believe that the biggest threat to American democracy is Trump. And if you field a weak candidate, a candidate who cannot complete 4 years, or who the American people believe cannot effectively complete 4 years, that Donald Trump can come into power, and it will be a big threat to democracy, a big threat to, whatever the values they hold here in the US and to the world. And so he was able to make that sacrifice to quit, even though he's still wielding executive powers. But in Africa, sycophants, lackeys, and hated men will be unleashed, so that they will go and sing praises, and the leader will never hear the real voice of the people.
And even shortly after U.S. President's announcement of withdrawing, we saw reactions from leaders from around the world, but leaders on this side of the world appeared mute about it. Why do you think this is so?
Of course, because most of them just want something they don't ever want to do, and they don't ever want their people to demand of them. So if they can control it, they will even block that kind of news from getting to their populace, because most of them don't intend to make that kind of sacrifice. They are not that selfless. They are not that patriotic. They are more or less, what we have in Africa is more or less power traders. Those who hang on to power, use power to make money, use more money to put more people to consolidate their power. So, pointing to or praising what Biden has done, or even acknowledging that Biden has done such a thing, may indirectly be an indictment to what they are doing or what they intend to do. So that's why you not hear African leaders doing that.
Okay, away from that conversation, we've seen protests in Kenya, for several weeks now, and then Uganda also protesting, youths especially. Nigerians are even also talking of going to the streets. But then again, we've seen leaders of Uganda and Nigeria in particular putting out stern warnings to the youth not to demonstrate. Do people not have the freedom to protest?
You see, a part of the African leaders, including that of Nigeria, they want to lead, they want to be like lords, like emperors. They don't even talk with their people. I can't remember the last time the President Tinubu of Nigeria, for instance, have engaged the people heart to heart, speaking from the heart, and talking to the people extempore, whether through the media or even through the town hall. What happens is that they hire people who write press conferences and then throw it at the people.
We'll seem to have lost the audio on that, but we're grateful. Thank you so much, African Affairs analyst Okwe Okpala, speaking to us there. And that's where we would be ending the program for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.